Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have another edition of all my books. This time it is my Dayton Ward edition. Now, I've done all my books for so many authors on the channel. I've talked about all my books for Terry Brooks and for people like Robert Jordan and for Brandon Sanderson and for Kevin J. Anderson and for Timothy Zahn and for John Jackson Miller, for the Star Wars books, the EU, for the canon, for the Star Trek books. I've done all sorts of all my books series. Today, I'm doing specifically one for Dayton Ward, who has written a bunch of Star Trek novels, and he wrote a few non-Star Trek novels. Now, I have 13 Star Trek novels from him and then 2 non-Star Trek novels. Of the 13 Star Trek novels, I've read 10 of them, and then I have 3 of them on my TBR. He's one of those authors, he doesn't really write my favorite novels, and some of his books are disappointing, but he consistently feels like Star Trek when you read his books. You can feel that they are actually good Star Trek stories, that they fit the Star Trek aesthetic. So, with that being said, let me get to the books. So first I will mention, I'm going in order of publication for Star Trek, and then I'll do his non-Star Trek ones at the end. So he had a frequent collaborator, Kevin Dillmore, who about half of these books are collabs with Kevin Dillmore. And the two of them frequently will write Star Trek books, and they'll write them pretty fast, so they turn in a lot. There's, I think, somewhere around 30 novels by Dayton Ward, and about half of them are done by Kevin Dillmore, but I only have 13 of them so far. But they started out in terms of the novel space, not in the ebook. They wrote some novella ebooks, but in the novel space, they wrote the duology, A Time to Sow and A Time to Harvest. And my A Time to Harvest is awful. It's an awful edition. It's been beat up by someone. Anyway, but I just have these books. So A Time to Sow and A Time to Harvest. And these books are not entertaining. They're the weakest books in the A Time To series, sadly. But they do add some context for the universe. They add some character development for some of the next generation characters, particularly for Geordi and for Beverly Crusher. But they have some other characters. They get some good development, but those are some of his weakest books. And speaking of some of his weakest books, we have Summon the Thunder from Vanguard. I'll go through all his Vanguard books here. You have Summon the Thunder, which I thought was not great. And then I have Open Secrets, which was a lot better. I think this is one of the better Vanguard novels, although it's just it's not amazing, but it's better. The Vanguard is basically, what if we told like a DS9 type storyline, but did it during the original series? And so you're following this Starbase 47 Vanguard, and it's in the Taurus Reach. And Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore wrote these novels along with David Mack, and so they kind of alternated back and forth. And so this is book 2 and this is book 4 in the series, and they're the Vanguard's not my favorite Star Trek series, but it's interesting. It's an interesting series, very thought provoking. And so then I have 2 of his books I have not read yet. Are this one? It's technically not exclusively Dayton Ward, but it's a collab. It is the Declassified anthology. It is a novella collection of 4 novellas, one by Dayton Ward, one by Kevin Dillmore, one by David Mack, and one by their editor, Marco Palmieri. And the one by Dayton Ward, I thought that would count for the purposes of this video. I wanted to include it since it's a book with his name on it. There are other anthologies that he's written short stories for that I just don't own. Then his final Vanguard novel is the penultimate Vanguard novel called What Judgments Come, that he also co-wrote with Kevin Dillmore. And this is the book that sets everything up for the grand finale that David Mack finishes out. So next, we're getting away from those books. We're getting into some of his really good books. In fact, the next 2 books I think are his best books. You have Paths of Disharmony, which tells a fantastic storyline about the Andorians leaving the Federation. I already knew that what would happen in this series, because I read the later books first, because I kind of jumped around with the post-Nemesis universe. But in this storyline, during the Typhon Pact storyline, various political groups are realigning, and some groups are leaving the Federation, some are joining the Typhon Pact, some are leaving the Typhon Pact, joining the Federation, and the politics of the 24th century is changing. And there is a fertility crisis. The Andorians are barely able to have any more children, and so they're trying to figure out how to fix that so they can have more children. And so in this book, the Enterprise crew is trying to, the Enterprise E is, that crew is trying to stop the crisis and help them out. But the problem is that there's political problems in addition to the fertility crisis that comes along, and it just makes everything really tough. So this book is one of his best. I think it's his second best book. It's a really, really good story. Then I also have what I think is his best novel by far, and that is From History's Shadow. This is technically part of the original series, but it's actually more of just a generic science fiction novel that has some Star Trek elements to it. It's about it's kind of a big flashback book. The beginning and the end includes the Enterprise crew very briefly, and then you flash back to the 1950s that has to deal with the humans on Earth during the Cold War, dealing with these kind of UFO sightings and these apparently aliens that are coming to Earth, and the CIA and these other covert groups are trying to keep things on the down low, and they're trying to figure out who these aliens are, and they tie into the whole Star Trek aliens from the Star Trek series, and it's very clever, very well done. It is a great example of taking an established genre of like Star Trek storytelling and adding in the kind of spy espionage element to it. There's kind of a fun love story in this book that I really appreciated. And it's really Dayton Ward showing he can flex his creative muscles. And this was actually a book that was nominated for the Scribe Award. And the Scribe Award is the highest award you can get in media tie-in fiction, specifically in speculative fiction, which is like original novels, not novelizations. And so this is an original storyline, and it was nominated. And I thought, man, that's a novel that should win the award. But it went up against John Jackson Miller's Kenobi in 2013, and Kenobi is just one of the best tie-in novels ever. I think it's the best tie-in novel. So it's unfortunate that it had to go up against such a heavyweight in Kenobi, but this is a superb tie-in novel. And so I really suggest, and it's standalone. It has, if you know Star Trek, you can read this book. And even if you don't know Star Trek that well, if you just know Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the Enterprise, you actually will do just fine because this book is only barely a Star Trek novel. So it's really well done. Next, we have his book in one of my favorite Star Trek series, Peaceable Kingdoms. This is part of The Fall. The Fall was a 5-book series where they had a big event, someone is assassinated, someone important is assassinated, and everything changes politically. And it's kind of a whodunit of trying to figure out who did the assassination and how does this affect the politics of the Federation. And each book follows a different crew and focuses on different parts of it, while each book is exploring more of the situation. And this book follows the Enterprise E, but it is basically finishing up. It's the wrap-up of the storyline. And it does a very admirable job of wrapping up the storyline. The problem that this book has is that it's a 5-book series. Book 1 was not a good book, but books 2, 3, and 4 are some of the best Star Trek books ever, so it had to go up against those heavyweights again, but it's still a really entertaining novel, and it's really well done, and a lot better than some of his other books, so I really recommend it. But read the other books in the series first. Next, I have his book, Purgatorys Key in the Legacies trilogy. Again, this is the wrap-up for the Legacies trilogy. The Legacies trilogy was meant to be the big 50th anniversary trilogy for Star Trek. For the 50th anniversary, they basically did 2 trilogies. The first trilogy is the Legacies trilogy, which really focuses on the TV show and the TV show characters and the TV show era. And so that's what this trilogy did. Then they had the Prey trilogy, which is my favorite Star Trek series, favorite Star Trek story of all time. And the Prey trilogy deals more with the Star Trek movies and the movie era stuff. And so those two trilogies were meant to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And this book is the third book in the trilogy, and basically number one, Una from Pike's ship ends up coming back to the Enterprise to try to solve the mystery of this crew, of the few crew members who went missing on this alien planet. And this kind of Citadel type thing is a major part of the trilogy. And this book is not the best book of the trilogy. It's actually the worst of the trilogy, but it's still a good book. That just shows how good the trilogy is. And they do, again, an admirable job. When he's trying to wrap up a storyline, he does an admirable job of it. And I really appreciate it. The next book of his I have is the book Drastic Measures. This is the last one of the Star Trek books that I haven't read. This is a Discovery tie-in novel. This one is in the timeline, the earliest Discovery novel, featuring Philippa Georgiou and also featuring Lorik. I forgot his name. And I haven't read this one, but I'm excited to read it because even though I do not like the Discovery TV show, I do like Dayton Ward's writing. And I'm going to go out of order for these last two because I'm going to stick with the Discovery theme. Is his newest release, Somewhere to Belong, is a Discovery novel set in between seasons 3 and 4 of the show when they jump into the 32nd century. And it's a pretty well-done novel. Even though I don't like the characters in the book, he does an admirable job of trying to write good character development with them. And he also just makes it feel like Star Trek. This is some of the most Star Trek-y that the Discovery novel line has felt to me that I've read. Discovery just doesn't feel like classic Trek, but it does here, which is actually quite impressive. So I enjoyed this book. And the final Star Trek book I'll talk about is his novel from the first novel in the Coda trilogy, Moments Asunder. This is the beginning of the end for the Star Trek line. When Discovery came out, they were still publishing the post-Nemesis line because it didn't step on toes particularly. But then the Picard series came out and completely changed the way they were telling Star Trek stories. And so the novelists realized they had to end the line, or they would have to do what happened with Star Wars and just have a reset and just the expanded universe is done, we're doing the canon now. And for Star Wars fans, there were a ton of fans that were ticked off and were like, we're never reading anything Star Wars again now because we're so ticked off about it. Well, for Star Trek, they didn't want that to happen. So what they said was, we're going to do this trilogy that ends this universe, but also makes it compatible with the Picard universe so that you can technically keep it all in the canon, which it's not exactly canon, but you know what I mean. And so this book starts the Coda trilogy. James Swallow and David Mack finish it up. And this book does a great job of reminding you why you love the post-Nemesis universe. Dayton Ward brings in connections all the way back to the A Time 2 books that I talked about. He makes references to the oldest of the A Time 2 books. He makes references to all throughout storylines. He connects things together, does a really explosive finale that's really well done. The Wormhole Death Canon is what he calls the writing group that they made. And this is just, it's a sad storyline, but it is a well-done conclusion that sets things up. So that's why I saved it for last, because it really is like that finale of that universe. And then I have two final books I have to grab because they're from another shelf, and those are his books, The Last World War and CounterStrike, The Last World War. This is a duology of, well, really the first book was meant to be a single book, and then he got the opportunity to write a sequel later. And these are kind of alien invasion World War books, and Dayton Ward has a history in the military. He was, I forgot what branch he was in, but he was in the military for a while before he became an author. And so he uses that expertise in these books, from what I understand. These are his only non-Star Trek novels that I own, but I intend to read them eventually because I think that I want to give him a chance outside of Star Trek, and that's what I try to do with all the novelists that I read in multiple genres. Star Wars, fantasy, sci-fi, otherwise. I want to read their other stuff to try to give them a chance. So I'll get to this eventually. So that is my collection of Dayton Ward novels. Some of them are co-written with Kevin Dillmore, but all of these are Dayton Ward books. If you've read any of his books, tell me, what are your favorites? Am I missing some of your favorites from him? Or do you have some least favorites? Let me know all your thoughts about Dayton Ward and his novels in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.